Oh boy, Brownlow. How far out are we from the Brownlow? It's Friday today, as I'm recording this. Probably going to release it today as well, hopefully. Um, so that gives us 1, 2, 3 days until the Brownlow. Amazing. Can't believe I have to count that on my fingers. What is happening? Welcome to episode 6.5 of the Footy and Stuff podcast. Not really a typical podcast episode, obviously. That's why I haven't called it episode 7. A little halfway podcast for the weekend, where I'm going to give my Brownlow predictions. So, I'm not going to waste too much time. We're going to get straight into it. I'm going to give my top 10 for the Brownlow this year. How did I put this together is the question. So throughout the year, I have my own Brownlow tracker, as many footy nerds do. Um, then I took a list of about 20 of those players once the season was done. And I went back through, and these 20 players were obviously in the mix for that top 10, top 15 region. Reviewed their vote tallies, came to a final number for each player, analyzed those two lists, and then sort of came to a final number, took the top 10 out. I'm going to deliver that to you here today. Before I get to my top 10, I do have three players who I've got all on 20 plus votes. I'm going to give them a special mention. So this is 11, 12, and 13. Um, I'll actually give you what vote number I had each of them on. So first uh, was Chad Warner, who I've got on 23 votes. Noah Anderson also on 23 votes, and Adam Treloar on 22 votes. They're the three players who have all got on 20 plus. No one else is on 20 plus for me, but they all missed out on the top 10. Warner was probably hurt slightly by the fact that he had two other boys with him who we're going to speak about in a minute. Spoiler alert, they both make the top 10. Um, so they're obviously all going to steal votes off each other. That's how it is. And B, the minor slump that Sydney had in that back end of the year saw him falter with them massively. He had a very quiet patch in there. First half of the year was enormous though, and generally on the whole a very good year for Chad, which sees him on 23 votes for me. Treloar I had on 22 was also probably a little bit hurt by the fact that he was next to Marcus Bontempelli. Spoiler alert, is also going to be on the list. We're not saying shocking things here. Um, his year was massively consistent, really impressive, but a few too many of those twos and ones came behind Bont, and that sent him out of the top 10 in the end. Unreal duo, though, and an unreal year for Treloar himself. And then Noah Anderson I have on 23, so just ahead of Treloar. He was fantastic as well. I have him hitting that 20 vote mark. Obviously, Gold Coast didn't win nearly as many games as they wanted to, and that probably hurt him. More wins would equal probably more votes for him because when they won, he was always up and about. He was always there in and around it. But he fell away with them a little bit when they were losing those games away from home. So, with all that in mind, let's get into the top 10. And at 10, we have Errol Gordon, a teammate of Chad Warner, who we previously mentioned, sneaks in at 10. And I say sneaks in because it was a fantastic effort for him to find himself there. The reason I say that is because playing alongside Warner and Heaney, as I just mentioned, hard to get votes. And early in the year, alongside those two, he was probably the least impactful of the three. Not saying he wasn't impactful at all, because he was still getting votes earlier in the year, but probably the least of the three. As the year went on, though, I think he really showed his quality, really was potentially the most consistent player of the three, especially in those losses and that slump we spoke about. And I think he was probably their best player through those games. I have him on 24, and I think that's probably a fair mark to be on in the end. But yeah, he was fantastic. And he'll probably score more this year. If we get a similar Sydney side, and I'll talk about this a bit with Heaney later. If we get a similar Sydney side to what we got this year, and there's there's not that big slump in the middle, I think we could see a player like Errol Gordon on more votes. Um, Obviously, you can't get three every week when you've got three of the best midfielders in the comp. But yeah, I think he was very good. In ninth, Zach Butters on 25 votes. So one vote ahead. Hitting that 25 vote mark and still being ninth in the comp is pretty insane. because that number probably gets you top three, top five in a lot of years. Zach Butters was very good this year. I have him on 25, as I said. Again, he's another player that probably would have had more votes, but their entire midfield was pretty good this year and pretty cohesive most games. Horn Francis and Rosie should both get close to 20. I think I had them both just for I definitely had them both falling short of 20. What am I saying? Um, Ollie Wines will poll well. I think Willem Drew will have a few votes as well. So yeah, naturally he's not gonna be the best player every game with those midfielders with him. But yeah, a really solid group next to him, and he's definitely the pick of the bunch. I think he had a very nice year. Very nice year. A couple of slumps throughout, but he still picks up 25 votes for me, which is a good tally. Equals seventh. First, we'll talk about Caleb Sarong on 26 votes. He's a fantastic player. Much like Butters before in Port Adelaide, I could bat on about players stealing votes all the time, but I think Freo operated brilliantly out of the middle for the majority of last year, and Brayshaw and Young should both finish quite well too. But Sarong is just the front man of that trio, at least this year anyway. I have him tied with another player on 26, but I think they could both certainly go higher. For that, we'd have to wait and see. But yeah, high volume possession getter, fantastic clearance player, unreal tackler. I think it was a career best season by almost every metric for Caleb. As was for the player tied with him on 26, Tommy Green. Tommy Green and equal seventh on 26. I said both could go higher. I think out of the two, this is the one that would probably make that push into the top five if anyone sort of out of the convo for the medal does that. I think we've seen players do it plenty of times before. We had Angus Brayshaw finish third that one year. Matt Predis won it after not really being in the conversation. Tommy's just an absolute bull. So dominant. I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of attention those high possession games get. I think generally he's a pretty impactful player and he's always going to get noticed for that impact. But he had a lot of high possession games in both wins and losses. And we know which way the umpires traditionally sway with this award in terms of midfielders. So I have him on 26, but we'll see what happens because he had a terrific year and he could get more. And GWS won a lot of games as well. And he was probably in their best crop of players in most of those games. So it's interesting. And we'll see where that goes. I've got him obviously equal seventh. Don't be surprised if he pushes a little bit higher. I'll tell you that much. And at sixth, on 28 votes, we've got Zach Merritt. Unbelievable this year. Unbelievable. Especially in that first half of the year where Essendon were also up and about. We talk about that and how he was sort of dragging them through games at that point. Not, I mean, they were good as a team, but he was front and center, just an unbelievable leader on field. And something that's very noticeable. I think he's going to start very well this season. Obviously, as the team's performance drops off, he's not polling as much. It's just not going to happen. But he was still very good. And I'd still be surprised if he wasn't getting votes somewhat frequently in the back end of the year. Definitely in the wins, even in the losses. It's going to be ones and twos on occasion. I think he had a really good year, a brilliant year. And he should have been All Australian, and I stand by that. I stand by that. Should have been All Australian. Don't know how that happened. But nonetheless, we go into the top five. And on 30 votes in at fifth, Marcus Bontempelli, Bont. It's so rough that this guy could pick up 30 votes here and finish fifth. Like, that's easily enough for a win in so many other years. But I have him on 30, finishing behind four players. Absurd. It's reflective of some of the individual brilliance that players have shown more frequently this year, including himself. But yeah, just another outstanding year from him. A lot of people were divided on the Dogs as a whole going into the year. And he's another one of those players who just threw the team on his back more often than not. I do hope that he gets that Brownlow by the end of his career, but obviously I don't think it'll be this year. Nonetheless, though, potentially a career best season from him. Again, I thought it was that good. As impactful going forward. He kicked 31 goals in the home and away season. That's his highest tally ever. So statistically the most impactful he's ever been going forward. Not much to say that hasn't been said about him aside from that, but he is fifth. He's fifth. Going into the top four, I've got two players tied on 31 votes. So starting equal third, we'll go with Heaney first. Because obviously he can't take that medal home if he were to win. However, just a fantastic year for him. Moved to the middle in a more permanent fashion and just dominated. He'll be leading this count for quite a while, I think. I think he'll poll almost every week until Sydney's second loss for the year, which was like round 16, round 15, something like that, against the Dockers. And then the suspension against the Saints was obviously the next week, and that unravels it all a bit and coincides with the team dipping as well. So when he got back, it wasn't necessarily the same Sydney side. Um, but yeah, he's still pulling up with 31 votes for me. Just terrific. A real threat next year if we even get a remotely similar Swan side. As I said before with Errol, and the same applies to Warner, who had both had inconsistent patches. If we get a similar Sydney team without that massive slump, I think they're just going to go on a rampage. And if we get that similar Sydney side and he finds himself in that same role, which I suspect that we would see that, there's no reason he can't absolutely steamroll his way to a Brownlow next year. But we'll see. Also tied with him on 31 votes in at equal third is Lachie Neale. The start of the season is going to hurt him massively because the team struggled and he struggled with them. I only have him on, and I will double check this. One, two. I only have him on 6 votes by round 10. So in those last 14 rounds, I have him polling 25 votes, which is an absurd amount. An absurd amount. He storms home in ridiculous fashion, in my opinion. Unreal back end of the year. And Brisbane were very good for that back end of the year as well. I mean, they were flag favourite for some people by that sort of round 20 mark. I think he should be a serious favourite for a lot of people next year if we assume that Brisbane have a more consistent year on the whole. But he was just unreal. And why are we surprised? He's a two-time Brownlow medalist, shooting for 3. Does he win it? I say no, but he's still going to be up there. And he's still fantastic. Just one of the best players we've ever seen. Like it's what more can I say? Moving on to the top 2. Now, not a lot separates these two players. I have the two of them polling in 15 games out of 22 each. They're both polling in 15 games, so it's going to be absurdly close. In at second, I have Nick Dacos on 36 votes. Now, keep in mind that that is the record for votes. 36. I have him tying it. Extremely consistent year. A couple more one-vote performances than the player I have in first, and I think that ends up being the difference. But just absurd. He's so good, and he's so young as well. He's going to win a couple of these at least. The big question mark in terms of how the umpires assess Nick is that he had a few games where he racked up the ball, 35 touches, 40 touches. There was that one in particular where he had 41. I think it might have been against the Crows. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'll correct myself. But those games perhaps weren't as effective or impactful as some other players. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of effect that'll have on his finish in the end. Do the umpires opt to give him 3 votes for a game like that rather than 1 vote for the high volume of possessions that he's getting and the accumulating that he's doing rather than the impact that it's having going forward, if that makes sense. That's a lot of waffling. But yeah, look, we'll see how they grade him. He's going to finish very well. He's going to finish very well. However, he does finish slightly behind the player I have him first on 37 votes, and that is Patrick Cripps. In at first. He gets 3s and 2s in almost every game he polls for me. I've got him on 1 game where he has 1 vote. So generally, if it's not 2 or 3, it's 0. Even losses like round 17 and 18, I have him on 2 votes in each of those games. He just puts the Blues on his back every single week. And he did that more than ever this year, especially in those losses and in the slumps where the team wasn't living up to the expectation that some of us had for them. he was outstanding every single week. Every single week. Um, I think his season this year eclipses that 2022 Brownlow year from a statistical standpoint. Um, but also, like anyone with two eyes could say with a level of certainty that he's been pretty dominant this year. I think he could easily break the record for most votes here, depending on how much the umpires punish the good performances that came in those losses, because he was outstanding in those losses, but it's so unpredictable, obviously. But I think he was unbelievable, and I think he will break that record. Um, but the same could be said for Dacos as well, with the good performances in those losses. Because I've got him picking up a few votes in those losses as well. It's going to be extremely close. I think it's a two-horse race, just about. Two fantastic players, though, and whoever wins it deserves it. That's the cold hard facts of this scenario. But with that, that is it for this short little video. I'm going to put the full top 10 up on the screen now so you can look at that. But yeah, just recapping, we'll go through it. In 10th, I have Errol Goulden on 24 votes. 9th, Zach Butters on 25. Equal 7th on 26 votes, I have Caleb Sarong and Tom Green, but watch Tommy Green, I'm telling you. In 6th, I have Zach Merritt on 28 votes. 5th, I have Mark Bontempelli on 30. Equal 3rd, Isaac Heaney and Lockie Neal on 31. 2nd, Nick Dacos on 36. And in 1st, breaking the votes record, I have Patrick Cripps. I am well aware with Patrick that I'm obviously going to look at games with a Carlton lens, in a sense. But I do try and be as unbiased as possible, and I think he was that good this year. And I think a lot of people would agree. Is everyone going to have him breaking the votes record? No, obviously not. But he's gonna give it a good shot, a good crack. So yeah, as I said, that brings us to the end of this short little podcast. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Follow Footy Stuff Pod on all socials. My personal TikTok as well, as I say every week. Yeah, like, subscribe, comment, give a rating, all that good stuff. And I will see you next week. Goodbye.